Hi guys, welcome back to a new video. In this video, we will learn what GraphQL is and the differences between the REST API and GraphQL and why do we need to choose GraphQL over REST API. We will find out in this video. This will be a 1 hour long crash course, so I hope you learn a lot from this tutorial. And also in this tutorial, we will learn to install GraphiQL. It's basically like a place for us to test out the GraphQL using Node.js. And without further ado, let's now get started. Alright, so now let's just take a look at the official website of GraphQL, which is graphql.org. And here we can quickly see that here it says, describes your data, ask for what you want, and get the predictable result. I will try to explain you the differences between REST and the GraphQL, but now let's just take a look at this main page first. And here we can see that it's basically right here it say that it give the client the power to ask for exactly what they want and nothing more. And this is just a sample that we can see and get many resources in a single request. And this is describe the type systems. And in this this tutorial, we also learn how to install this GraphiQL as well. So it's similar to GraphQL, you can also pronounce it as SQL. So for this, I'm going to pronounce this as GraphiQL. So again, this tutorial, we will be install this in the Node.js. And there's more here. And here you can see that who's using GraphQL. First one is Facebook, GitHub, and a lot more like Pinterest, Coursera, and Shopify, a lot more. So now let's just take a look at this graph before getting into how to install the GraphiQL. Okay, so this is the REST. Now let me just quickly switch this for now. Okay. So now we can see that this is the REST. Say if basically if you want to get a list of user, you will have to call an endpoint. In this case, this is going to be the GET request. And once you call the endpoint or hit the endpoint, then you get a list of user. Say in this case, this is with the ID. So you get an ID of the user here as well. And the name, address, date of birth. There's a lot more here. And say another one right here, if you want to get a post of a particular user, then you will need to hit another endpoint, which is the case again. This is another endpoint using the GET request. Once you hit the endpoint, you will be able to get a list of posts, and you can see that inside the post, it has the ID, title, content, and comments, etc. And one more example here, if you want to get a particular follower detail, then once you hit that endpoint, you will get like the detail of the follower, including the ID, name, address, date of birth, birthday here. And this is another GET request. So now let's just take a look at the GraphQL. You can now see that it's require you to only hit one endpoint or only one request, which is in this case, it only supports the post request. And here you can see that the structure of basically what we want to ask for. So in this case, I say I want to get the information of a particular user. So in this case, this is the ID of that particular user, and we want to get the name of that user and also the title of a post of the this user. Then I can just define it like this. And also if I want to know the name of the follower that the user has, then I can just define it like this. So once I have all of the information that I want, then I just need to hit that endpoint with the post request, and this is the result that I get, which I get the user name right here. This is the title of the post, and this is the follower of that particular user. And here you can see that this is the power of GraphQL, that you don't actually need to call several requests or hit several endpoints to be able to get the data or the information that you want. And with this, only require the single request. And you can just define whatever you want. So say in this case, I don't want the title for the post. I want instead have the ID or the content of the post. Then I would be able to just specify it right here, and I will get the result that I actually looking for. And you can find more information about the graph here in this URL as well. So now let's just get back to the coding part, which I'm going to install the GraphiQL using the Node.js. Alright guys, so now I have created this empty folder called GraphQL tutorial, and now I open this in the Visual Studio Code. So now what I need to do, first basically I need to install. Now let me just open the terminal right here inside this Visual Studio Code. Alright, so now I'm going to install the package.json file. So I'll run the command npm init. Okay, so here it asks for the package name. I can leave it like that. This one right here, I can just say GraphQL. Entry point, I'll set this to server.js instead of index.js. Press enter multiple times. This is okay. Enter again. And here we can see that a new file has been generated with the information that I just specified, like the description and the main here, server.js. Okay, so now we will need to install a few libraries. I'll need to show you that in the browser. Alright, so here you can see that we need to have 3 of the libraries. First one is the Express. This is basically the web framework for Node. And second one right here, the Express GraphQL, which is the HTTP server middleware for the GraphQL. The third one right here, this is the GraphQL.js. It is essentially the query language for API created by Facebook. And this library contains a list of GraphQL functions that we can just use it in the Node.js. Okay, so now let's just go back to the coding. And here we need to specify npm I express. So I stand for install. We install more, which is the Express GraphQL. And one more, which is the GraphQL itself. And now it's installing. Okay, so now it is installed. Now let's just try to create a new file called server.js. Okay, so we can also quickly check here as well. So this is the dependency with these 3 libraries. And let me also quickly try to install another library. Okay, so this is another library that we will need to install, which is NodeMon. Basically, if you make any changes to the file, then once you save the file, it will automatically restart the Node applications. So it saves us a lot of time using this library. And this is the command. I'm going to now just use this to install it as the development dependencies. Just copy that, go back to the code, paste it here. Alright, so now it is installed. Let's just go back to the server.js. On top here, I'm going to import the library we just installed. The first one is Express, require Express. Okay, next one will be the GraphQL HTTP. Express GraphQL, and we need to use the app equal to Express. Down here, app.use, and we need to specify the endpoint. I'm going to use this as GraphQL, and right here we use the GraphQL HTTP, and inside here I use the GraphiQL. So make sure that it's GraphiQL, it's not GraphQL, GraphiQL. Okay, now once I have that, let me just define another one. Now listen, I'm specify this as 5000, port 5000, and console log this. Say I just use this symbol, server running on port 5000. Okay, let's just save that. Also, going back to the package.json, here we need to change this because if you still remember, we just installed the Node.js. So let's just define this as dev and Node.js, and the file that we want to run, which is server.js right here. Just save that, and down here to run this, just run npm start dev start. Okay, so now it's starting, and here you can see that the server now running on port 5000. Let me just quickly open this one up. Alright guys, so here you can see that the server is up and running, and it just say that it cannot get this because we haven't specified the endpoint of the home page. Okay, so now when I hit the endpoint, localhost 5000/GraphQL, you can see that the GraphQL middleware must contain the schema. Right now we haven't defined any schema yet, but it's a good starting point. So this is, we get all basically like a structure of what it's going to be. We have the GraphQL, GraphiQL right here. Okay, next let's just take a look at the this one right here, GraphQL. Take a look at this. We will now need to import some of this. So now let me just copy this because we will need to define like a schema which look something similar to this. Let's just copy the whole part, going back to the code, paste it right here. I don't think we need this for now. We will need the actual schema, the object type, as well as the string. Let me also define some more, which is the the string right here. We will also need to have the basically like a list, GraphQL list. I'll explain you what it means by that once we go further. Okay, so here we do not need to use the import. We need to define the cons, and right here this one should be the require GraphQL. All right, let's just go back here. I need to just copy everything from here. Let's just go back and basically right here, let's just update this to const, the schema, object type, name, field. I guess for the field, let's just remove this. we need to define the field. This will be an arrow function. Let's say this case I want to specify this as the message. So this one, it will be the GraphQL string, and here we have the resolve. So for the resolve, it's like everything that we specify here, it will return it to the front end. So I would say just hello world. All right. So now let's just save that. Okay, so here you can see that there is no issue. Right here, we need to also specify the schema itself. This will be schema or schema. And yep, it's up and running. Now I want to quickly explain this again. So we have the GraphQL schema, object type, the name. You can just give any name, but make sure that you don't put any space in between, otherwise you get an error. And we have the field here. Inside the field, we have the message with the type of string, because again, this is returning a string with the resolve here. And let's just go back and take a look. Let me refresh this. And here it is, guys. So now we have the GraphiQL installed on our local machine running on port 5000. And this is all of the default text. And here we can see that the documentation explorer with the root create type. When we click on that, here we can also see that this is the message that we specify, which the type of the string. So when I click on this, we can also get the string value here as well. Once we go further, we try to explain what string does, and this one as well. Okay, so just to show you, I'm going to use this as query. And inside here, once I click on message, you can see that there's like a drop down where we can just click on that, and I can click on this play button. Now you can see that I get the message, and also here it's returning the string value, which is hello world. Or one more thing is I can just use the shortcut with this message. When I click on that, here we get the same result without using the keyword query. And again, let me just quickly show you another one. Let me just quickly copy this and paste it down here. This time I will use something else, say random value like hi. Probably right here, just say hi there. And I save it. Go back, refresh. Okay, so now I want to this time call the hi. When I click on that, here we can see that there's another value right here, which is hi. So basically we have installed this GraphiQL with the tool here, and we can just try to test out every data that we specify inside the code. So this is only the dummy data. And now the next step I want to do is I want to specify some data in the object type. Alright, so in this tutorial I'll be using the placeholder data. So right here we got the owner and the pets. So inside the owner we have the ID, which is the first one right here, John and extra here. And inside the pet we have the ID, we have name, and also the owner ID. So this will mean that if the owner ID is 1, which means that John owns the pet. It can be like a dog or a cat, but I didn't specify it here. I just used the name. So it's Charlie, and more here. You can see the owner ID with all of the name here. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do next is to get a list of the a pet and also a list of the owner, or if I only want to have like the particular owner or want to have the particular pet, then what do I need to do? I can't just use it something like this, because again this is just like the hard-coded data, and that means I will need to use the root query type. All right, so this is no longer needed. Just comment this one out, and I need to use the root query type. It will be GraphQL object type. Inside here, I need to specify a name. Just call it as query. Give it a description. Can be root query. Right. Next one is field. Arrow function. Inside here, I can just use pets. Now we need to basically define the custom type. So this will be type, and we will need to use the pet type. The description, I would say a list of all pets, and also the comma here as well. So we define this. Basically what this does, it will return a list of pets, and down here we want to return the pet object. Okay, so here we will need to define the resolve, which this will return the pet object. All right, so we define the root query type. And now let's just take a look on top here. You remember that we also import the GraphQL list as well. So now it comes into using this. So I need to use the keyword new, and I will need to wrap the pet type like this. Okay, next we will define the pet type. So let's just define it on top here. It will be pet type GraphQL object type. The name, let's just give this a name as pet. Description, this represents a pet owned by an owner. Field, so here we need to get into the ID, the name, and also the owner ID as well. So let's just use the ID. The type, it will be the GraphQL int. All right, so which looks something similar to this. And I will need to define two more. Name, type GraphQL string. Third one will be the owner ID. GraphQL int. Okay, so we have this. Okay, so this is what it's like. And if you notice, you can also see that I didn't specify the resolve. The reason being is that right here, this is the data that we need to define, like the dummy one. But in this case, we will be using or getting the data coming from here. So that's a reason why we don't need to specify that. And if I scroll down, you can see that this is the result right here, which is a list of pets. This is the pet value, as you can see, coming from here. So that's a reason why we don't need to have that. Another one I want to specify, which is the right here. I want to define the GraphQL non-null. Okay, so what this does is basically it will not, or it cannot return the null value for a single type, so not at all. So basically it's just like that all of the value that we have here, they are not null. Okay, so now let me just go back here, and we will need to wrap that inside this GraphQL int and string and stuff. So GraphQL non-null will be similar to this. Another one right here. Okay, so we have the pet type. You can see that we get the error message because we haven't defined the schema. So this is schema coming from the above, which I just commented out. We need to define it down here. Const schema new GraphQL schema and query with the root query type, which is coming from here, and this one pet here, which is related to this, which is the pet type. Okay, let's just save that again. And here it says that it throws an error because the query result must be an object. Okay, so the issue here is the resolve. It's supposed to be inside this pet. All right, let's just save it again. Has anyone noticed that I just used this? Okay, so let now just again, here it is, running on port 5000. Let me also close some of this as well. No longer needed. Okay, let's just take a look at the doc here. We have the query, and here this is the field. We have pets, list of pets right here as well, and this is the root query that we define. So inside the pets, here's a list of pets, and we have the type, which is pet, the custom type, and this represents a pet that owned by an owner. And here we have the three fields, ID, name, and the owner ID. And now let's just try this out. So this will be pets. Inside here, I want to get, say, a name, a list of name. So here you can see when I click on that, this is a list of pets that it's coming from the data that I defined in the code. And what about if I want to get the ID as well? So you can also click on this button to make this look a little bit nicer. And again, click on that. Here you can see that it comes with the ID. And what about the owner ID? You can just specify it down here. And here we get the information that we want. What about if I want to only get the owner ID? I can do that as well. So this is again the power of using the GraphQL. Otherwise, if we going to hit the normal REST endpoint, it will just come with all of the unnecessary data that we don't actually want all of them. Okay, so that's the step that we done so far. All right, so next, say if I want to get the owner, basically the name of the owner inside this pet. So how would I do that? Say if I click on the run button, you can see that it says cannot get the query of owner type inside here. So that means we have to write some code to make this work. So that's what we are doing here right now. All right, so now let's just define the owner inside this pet type. So it will be the owner, and inside here it will be the type of the owner type. This is going to be the custom one. And again, since the owner, it doesn't exist in the object, as you can see here, the owner doesn't exist here. that means that we have to find the owner with the ID from the path. So this is the relation. The owner ID, say this is 1, it relates to this particular owner, or say this one here, the owner number 3, then it related to this. That now we have to use the resolve of the path. This is basically the parent. It takes the parameter of parent, but right now we use the path. Down here it will return, we will use the owners find, and in here we will use the owner. It will just keep looking for the ID of the owner. If it equal to the owner ID inside the path, so this one right here, say this one, it's equal to the number inside this owner, then it will just return that result to us. All right. Okay, so now let's just define the owner type. So it will be const owner type, which basically similar to this one. Let me just copy everything. And I will remove this one here, and this instead will be owner type. Change this to owner. This will represent an owner of a path. And field, we have ID, we have name. Let's just save this. And also because again we don't need the resolve, that's because in the object we already has the object of the ID right here as well as the name. So that's the reason why we don't need to use the resolve function. Okay, so now we have the owner coming basically here, and the data with the two field, the ID and name. Okay, so now let's just go back and I try to hit this again. Alright, so you guys can now see that we get the owner and also with the name here as well. Now let me just refresh this because you can see that there's some here the syntax issue. Okay, so let's do that again. We have the this time let me just instead use the path name and also ID. So we have the ID of the path, which is number 1. Let me also specify the owner ID as well. Okay, so this is clearer. We have the owner ID, which is number 1. The owner name is John. With this, the owner number 2, which is Kelly, and the third one, which is Jack. So you can see that I just whatever data that I want, I can just specify based on the need. And this is the benefit of using the GraphQL. Okay, so for the doc, let's just take a quick look again. The query, we have the path, we have the inside here the path, and inside now we got the owner, and inside the owner we have the ID and the name. And when I click on this, and here we can also see the type owner here as well. It basically exactly the same thing. It represents the owner of a path, which is exactly the same thing here. Now let's just take a look at the graph. If we consider it as like the graph form, we can see that it basically like the query, the root query type here. We call the name here, which is the root query. Here we can see that when we go a little bit further, we got the path, and inside here we get another path, and finally we get the owner inside that path. So that's it, just like a different nodes, different level of the thing that we specify, so that we can just use this very easily, and it's make the complex data into the very simple one when we can just call using just a single request. We have the paths here. So now what about if I want to define the owner and get a list of, say, owner name? Then just remove this, try to refresh for now, and let's just click on this play button. We can see that we cannot get this because we haven't defined it in the code yet. Okay, so right here it will be at the root query type. Okay, so we will now need to define it right here, so which is quite similar to the paths we got. We just need to change this to owners. This one will be the owner type. The list of owners resolve, which is the owners. All right. So this will coming from the list of this data, and down here the owner type that we have already specified, which this data, the ID and the name. Okay, so now let's just go back and try to run this again. Let's just refresh this, and here it is, guys. So we got the owners with the name here, and let me just click on the query. You can now see that instead of one, which is pets, we now get the list of all pets and a list of all owner as well. Let me just try to add the ID here. We can also get the ID. And what about the pets? Let me just get a list of pets with the name. And yep, this is the result that we get. Okay. Okay, so now I want to know a list of pet names that each owner has. So basically I just cut this and put it here. Click on this. We might get an error right now. And here it is. You can see that we cannot get the query of pets on the type owner. That basically means that we haven't defined it in the owner type right here. Okay, so which is quite similar to the pet type. Let me just copy this part right here. And inside here, just paste it. We need to change this from owner to pets. Just put S because each owner has multiple pets, and the type right here, because it will return like a list of the pet type, we will just use the GraphQL list with the pet type, and the pet right here we change it to owner just because that we are using inside this owner. It is the parent parameter. The owners here, just change it to pet. Instead of find, it will be the filter because it will filter out a list of pet that it found. So this is the pet, and right here this will be the pet dot owner ID. If it is equal to the owner dot ID right here. Okay, so it seems to be fine. Let's now just try it again. Apparently this one is not defined. Okay, another typo right here. So this is supposed to be I. Running on port 5000. Refresh this. Click on the run button, and here we go. This is now we get the result. So basically we have the owner with the ID, the name, and this user, he basically own 4 pets, which all of the name here. And the second owner own 2 pets, and finally the third one, he own 4 pets. So again, it's quite simple to use this. I can also add the ID here as well, and we get the ID of the particular pet name. As you can see, this is very simple and easy to use when it comes to GraphQL, or we test it inside this GraphiQL. Okay. Alright guys, so now we get a list of the pets and also a list of owner. How about if I want to get only a single pet or a single owner? Okay, so that means we have to also define it on top here as well. So it's going to be, the first one is pet, and we need to define the type, which is, in this case, it is not a list. So we only need to specify the pet type, and down here the description we can just say a single pet, and here we need to use the arguments, so it will be dr, and inside it will be the ID, which is the type of GraphQL int, and down here we can just use the result, and it take two parameters. The first one is the parent. In this case we are not using it, but because we are using the args, then we can just define it here. Now it will be the pet dot find, and we will find the pets. So it will be the ID of the pets equal to the arguments of the ID, which we will specify it in the GraphiQL, right? So it would look something like this. So pet, single pet, and arguments with the ID that we will need to provide. If it's equal, then it will just return us the pet. All right. So now let me just go to the website, show you. Okay, so once we define, let's come back here. I want to get a single pet. It will be the ID. So I want to get the pet ID number 1, and I want to also see the ID and name here as well. And here it is. We can see that I can now manually enter the ID, and this is the second one, say number 9. I can also get the single pet name Ruby here. And also, if I want to know who owns this pet name Ruby, I can just come here and just put the owner and name. And here you can see that this owner named Jack, he owned the pet name Ruby. So that's very easy to use when it's come to GraphQL. And I want to also have a single owner as well. So I'm going to copy all of this, basically just paste it here. Okay, so what we need to change, we need to change this to owner, and this will be the owner type, owner. Okay, so this will be owner, and the ID stay the same. This will be the owner, and argument, just keep it like that. Now let's just come back here. Okay, so for this I will change it to owner, and name ID, just keep it like that. And the ID owner, we only have 3 in the data that we define. So here we have the ID and also the name. Say if this is number 4, we won't get anything. Okay, so this is number 2. Okay, so how about I put the pet here with the name, and we get this error message. The reason is that, if you still remember, the single owner, the person can own basically multiple pets. So that's why right here we can just define it as pets, and here this is a list of users who own 2 pets right here. So what about the ID number 1? and the owner named John own 4 of these pets. So that's how we define in our code. And let's just take a look at this here as well. Okay, so here let me just refresh this page. And when I click on the query, now you can see that we have a single pet, a list of all pets, a single owner, and a list of owners. All right. So next I want to show you is to basically how we are going to modify the data. Right now we can only get the data coming from the data that we define, which is coming from all of this data here. And right now I want to add a new data into this. All right, so now let's just take a look at how do we modify the data that we already have. And if we can think of the REST API, it will be the post request, put request, or delete request. And in the GraphQL, we use something called mutation. Okay, so now let's just go back to this code, and we're going to define it down here. So mutation, we need to define another one, which is root mutation type. All right, so on top here will be const root mutation type. This will be another GraphQL object type. Give this a name, mutation, with the description of root mutation. Need to specify the field. Okay, we will now need to specify the object. Let me just call this as add new pet with the type of pet type. Description will be add a new pet, and we need the argument as well. So argument will be the name, the type, and we don't want the user to enter any like the non-value, so this will be GraphQL non-null, and wrap this in the GraphQL string. Let's just copy this. This will be another one. The pet, we have the owner ID. This will then be the GraphQL int. Add a comma here as well. So once we have this defined, next one will be the resolve. We take 2 parameters again. The second one that we require, which is the R. And right here, we need to have this pet that includes the ID of the pets. To get the ID of the list of these pets. So right now we have this 10 of pets. So we need to know the next one. Then we can just use this dot length and +1. So this will be the 11 for the ID, and the name we get from here with the owner ID. Owner ID, just specify it like this, and next it will be the pets. We will push this new data with this information specified into basically this pet right here, into the pet that we already have on top there. And now we can return the pet. Okay, so this what it looked like. Now let's just go to the GraphQL and try it again. Let me just refresh this for now. Okay, so now let me just clear all of this, and we need to use the keyword mutation here when we want to modify any data. So it will be the add new pet, and the parameter will be the name. I'm going to call the new pet as Lucky, and we need to also provide the owner ID. Let me just do this, and the ID here I want to give to the owner number 2, and what it will return the name as well as the ID. Now let's just see this, and here it is, guys. You can now see that we add this new name, the new pet name called Lucky, and the ID is number 11. So now I want to get the list of this data. Okay, so to get a list of pets, it will be pets with the name and ID. And now let's just take a look. When I scroll down, here it is, guys. So you can now see that we have a new data added to this. But remember that if I try to restart the server, then the data will be gone. But if you have your real data, real database, then it should not be a problem. All right. So next, I want to do something similar to the add new right here. This is the basically adding a new pet. I want to add a new as well. So I'll just need to copy this. Okay, so it should be from here up until here, and paste it here. Now I want to change this to add new pet to add new owner. Type will be owner type. Add a new owner. Because inside the owner we don't have this, so we can get it off this one. We only require the name, the same as this one. This is not needed. This will be owners. This one will be owner. These owners of the length. Then this one, it will be the, right now we have 3, so the next one will be ID number 4, and this is the name. And now let's just change this to owner. We will then return the new owner back. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. Let's just try this out. Okay, so it will be mutation, add new. Let me just refresh this. Okay, add new owner with the name. Let me just use my name instead this time. It will be Hong. We don't need to specify anything behind that, and then I can just add my the name and also the ID when you return, and here it is. You can now see that the ID is ID number 4, and here the name, which is Hong. This is the new owner. All right, so now I want to get a all which is the owner. I want to see the ID and also the name. When I click here, now you can see that I get the list of the owner, including my name down here. Before finishing this video, let's now just recap what we have learned so far. So here we can see that we have the data, and we define the pet type, the owner type here as well. We also define the root query type, which includes all of this, the single pet, a list of all pet, a single owner, and a list of all owners. Not only that, we also have the root mutation type that allow us to basically add a new pet, and we can also add a new owner here as well. And you can see that within over 100 lines of codes, we can now have this up and running and try it out with this GraphiQL. And that's pretty much it for this GraphQL crash course. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and share this video if you find it useful. Also subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this. Until then, see you guys in the next video.